Okay, time for me to get
Now, ladies and gentlemen, coming up in section please, at this time, please find the seats. We're going to be beginning the service very soon. If there are not enough seats, we are still going to broadcast this on any of our TVs throughout the house. Feel free to stand. Thank you. Did you see up here?
So we're gathered here today to celebrate the life of Adel Saada, beloved husband and father, respected teacher and mentor, and the recipient of much loving disrespect from his children and grandchildren. Our father was one of those larger-than-life characters where if you handed his biography to a Hollywood studio, they would reject it out of hand as unbelievable. How do you summarize over 90 years of love, laughter, scholarship, travel, and adventure in only a few minutes? Nail-biting escapes, strokes of good luck, fortuitous meetings on ski slopes, his life had them all. Even now, after his passing, my sister and I are uncovering new nuggets of his colorful history while going through old letters and photos. While we're sad for his passing, he had a long life well lived, and as a tribute, we would like to have various people share stories and anecdotes of his many escapades. To start things off, my sister and I would like to read a poem that we wrote on the occasion of his 65th birthday, now more than a quarter century ago.
Decade 1, 1934 to 1944. Adel Saada was born in 1934 in Egypt, land of pharaohs, ancient temples, sands galore. He grew up in Heliopolis, a town outside of Cairo. His parents called him Antoine, and his siblings called him Toto. At 3, his curly locks gleamed in the golden sun. On the balcony, he took scissors and clipped them one by one. His mother saw them drifting down and cried out in despair. Little Antoine's backside learned that day the price of cutting hair. At Catholic Sisters' School, he learned to read and write, and to liven up the classes, he gave his teachers quite a fright. They put him in the cachot noir as a form of punishment, but that closet had a peephole that provided entertainment. Antoine saw the sisters cloistered in their private lounge and got to see what was beneath those long black copper convent gowns. He got sick with hair typhoid and had to stay a year in bed. In order to get better, he was forced to eat raw eggs. The boredom was unbearable, and when he could take no more, he slipped into the hall and picked the locked library door. The books within had been forbidden, but bed rest calls for desperate measures, so he spent his time in bed reading Daddy's hidden treasures.
Decade 2, 1944 to 1954. Then his schooling switched from convent nuns to Christian brothers. He excelled in every class, towering far above the others. At church, he was an altar boy, an angelic one, they say. He must have had him fooled because he didn't act that way. On the soccer field, he felt the need to gain some extra height. From atop his stilts, he kicked the ball and sent it out of sight. He was cast as a guard when Aida came to town, and with his spear in hand, he marched his prisoner up and down. They rehearsed the scene quite often, but when the curtain rose one day, Toto exited stage left while his prisoner went the other way. Things got a little crazy on his walk to school one day. Rioters were in the streets. Adel ran to get away. They didn't like the way he looked. His skin, it was too light. They thought Adel was Jewish and chased him left and right. He dodged into the red light district to evade the nasty mob and lost them in the maze of streets with many a weave and bob. He hid all day and night till it was quiet in the streets. What he did while he was waiting? Well, he's always been discreet.
Decade 3, 1954 to 1964. He studied engineering at Cairo University and then at École Centrale in faraway Paris. The desert boy discovered cold and white precipitation, and the targets of his snowballs looked at him with indignation. He toured the Paris nightclubs, danced with all the pretty girls, and guided them across the floor with swoops and dips and twirls. To gain a new degree, to Grenoble he did go, and while he studied there, he learned how to ski on snow. Riding up the chair was fun right up to the top, but going down he soon found that he didn't know how to stop. A lovely girl named Nancy was the one who caught his eye. To ask her name and number, to her side he soon did fly. But since he couldn't stop, right into her he ran. She went headlong in a snowbank, and he fell on his can. But his offer of hot chocolate she still could not deny, despite some slight misgivings on the intentions of this guy. By offering Turkish cigarettes, he almost blew his chance. His charm came through and saved the day, though she looked at him askance. And so the seed of love was planted in her beating heart, though for a time it fallow lay while fate kept them apart. For dashing looks and sparkling wit we give our thanks, and how, for if he hadn't had them, we fear we wouldn't be here now. At last fate kindly intervened, and he came to the States for a Ph.D. from Princeton, and maybe for some dates. His English needed practice, or at least that's what he claimed. When he drove for hours to look her up, his ardor still untamed. Well, their relationship continued in the way things do in life, and it wasn't very long till she agreed to be his wife. She returned with him to Princeton to an apartment by the lake. As man and wife, they started in a family they would make. And soon a girl was born to them, Christian by name, and to a piece of daddy's heart she smiled and laid her claim. She watched him while he slaved away working on his Ph.D., and to give him her opinion upon it, she did pee. He left ivy-covered Princeton, Ph.D. in hand, and started building up his lab for testing soil and sand. He was a new professor in Cleveland by and by. He started his career at Case and began to make mud pies.
Decade 4, 1964 to 1974. A few years passed, a son arrived, a very clever boy. His name was Adel, and he became his father's pride and joy. It soon became apparent that an engineer he'd be. He broke the table and patched it up before the age of 3. And with his growing family, Tony moved to Shaker Heights. He bought a fixer-upper and strove to set it right. He learned to mow a lawn, to edge and pull the weeds, and with his kitty's help, he raked and jumped into the leaves. As the years went by, he wrote a weighty tome full of long equations that would stretch from here to Rome. A hit among the slide rule set was elasticity, but since it didn't have a plot, 'twas Greek to you and me. He taught his kids the art of skipping with great speed, and as for pillow fights, well, his windmills we could heed. As we grew to scouting age, he made treasurer his bench, because the last thing he would do was to sleep inside a tent. He escaped into the basement to work with saws and tools, making tables, shelves, and cabinets and other wooden jewels. The basement was the place where mighty spac was built, with gauges, dials, and tubing for testing soil and silt. Tony took his family to the far-off Middle East, to Egypt and to Lebanon, and to the ruins in Greece. While visiting the pyramids beneath the desert sun, the Bedouins took his family off on camels one by one.
Decade 5, 1974 to 1984. His career at Case took off. A full professor he became, and once he was department head, revolutions were his game. Lots of papers followed. He was an academic stud. His research strode forth boldly, while others chewed their cud. A trip to the far-off Orient was almost more than he could handle, and to preserve his sanity, his son lit him a candle. They traveled to Kyoto in temple-filled Japan and saw the Buddhas and the deer that ate right from your hand. High school was almost finished, and when his kids were through, both his children and his paycheck were being sent to Princeton U. Meanwhile, back in Cleveland, a workshop he did hold. The data that was generated was worth its weight in gold.
Decade 6, 1984 to 1994. Both his children graduated with engineering degrees. To have 2 more in the family made him pretty pleased. The raise he got was wondrous, but not long would it last, for he'd have to pay for weddings before many years had passed. The ski trips that he took us on were lots and lots of fun. His kids liked especially to go down the bumpy runs. They'd stand up near the top and ask, how hard could it be? And show up at the bottom, snowy white from head to knee. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad would be cruising down the slopes, laughing at their kids who were acting like such dopes. The best part of the day, though, was soaking in the tubs, trading tall tales of our prowess and drinking lots of suds.
Decade 6.5, 1994 to 1999. Subtle hints were soon abounding about small bundles of joy, and how they'd love for us to have a little girl or boy. A historic photo came at last while we skied in Telluride. 3 buns were in the oven that the ski jackets did hide. At last, in 96, the kiddies came along. 3 grandkids were born that year with voices loud and strong. Nat loves to play at football and Katie loves to sing. Caroline to be read to, and lots of joy they bring. Whenever Grandpa visits, they all follow him around with hands behind their backs and lots of stomping on the ground. They use him as a jungle gym and like to steal his nose, or clamber up into his lap and slide down to his toes. And now it seems retirement is coming up at last. He's doing lots of traveling and plans to have a blast. Although he's 65, there's still one thing he cannot get. He's been asking for respect, but he hasn't got it yet.
Now, 65 is the age where most people would retire, but for our dad, he still had more than 20 years of teaching left. Nor did he slow down on the travel front. Despite being a professor, our parents managed to fit in at least one major trip every year until our mother's passing in 2011. Russia in '99, China in 2000, the family reunion cruise in 2002, Machu Picchu in 2003. The list goes on and on. They traveled right up until Nancy was diagnosed with leukemia on her birthday in 2010. And the next year was spent taking care of her until she passed in July of 2011, a loss that Dad carried until his death. In 2012, I took my dad to France to visit their old haunts for a bit of closure, and it wasn't too long after that my father had another fortuitous encounter. Carol Fox, an old friend from the church and the ballroom dance club, had lost her husband Steve and ran into my father around Christmas Eve. They decided to spend New Year's Eve together, and so began his second time around. The two of them began dating and traveling together, and in 2013 took the Rivers of Europe cruise that had been canceled several years prior when my mother fell ill. For the next several years, the two of them would visit national parks, watch the great courses, and enjoy each other's company. Her entering Dad's life was a dramatic improvement in both his quality of life and in his attitude. Our phone conversations were less about how much he missed Mom and more about the fun plans that he and Carol had. Their ability to travel was curtailed by Carol suffering a stroke, but the great courses, Wordle puzzles, and crosswords continued on. Eventually, Carol moved to the East Coast to be closer to her kids, but they still continued to talk on phone every day until the end. For the last year, Dad was slowing down, seeing the end of his great adventure approaching. He made sure to wind up his affairs at Case, handing off ownership of the Saada family fellowships, and made a last trip to visit Carol this summer. In the end, he chose to go out on his own terms, passing peacefully in his bed at home. Now, chances are, he's harrumping at St. Peter, hearing Nancy say, "Tony, you can't say that," one more time, and kicking the foundations of heaven to make sure that everything is still stable. So at this point, we'd like to hand off the podium to a few people to tell stories of their experiences with my father. I'd like to start off with Jeff Olson, my mother's cousin, to tell some good stories of the old days.
Wow, that was really something, wasn't it? Really well done, you guys. It's an honor to be here today, and I represent our family in Maine and my much older cousin Rick here, Nancy's brother. I'll put my glasses on here. So we were trying to get the exact dates, but we are figuring that sometime in the late 50s, Tony came to Rick's house, and which happened to be his mother and my mother were sisters, and they both were born on a little island off the coast of Maine that I still live on. I've been in our Scottish family for over 200 years. And we were quite close. We lived right around the corner, and Thanksgivings were a tradition to go over to Dick and Ruth's house for a wonderful Thanksgiving. But this one was special. This guy who had captured Nancy's heart was going to be there, meeting the family for the first time, and we were all quite excited. But his name was Adel Saada, so we didn't know quite what to expect, but we heard good things. And when he came, he walked in the room and he was stunning. He was like movie star handsome, and we thought only our cousin Nancy, who was absolutely beautiful, could have a boyfriend like this. He captured our hearts immediately. Right after Mom and my Aunt Ruth stopped worrying about him carrying Nancy off to a tent in the desert somewhere. we all just fell in love with him. And my Uncle Dick, who was a hard case to please at times, he'd come to love Tony because Tony immediately evaluated his beer keg refrigerator in the basement, which he used to pressurize with a foot pedal, and said, Dick, you need to have a pressure gauge on this thing to do it properly. And he immediately installed that, and it was much better beer after that. Then you go forward a couple of years probably, and the family all met at the graduation, Nancy's graduation, when she graduated valedictorian from Elmira Women's College. And she gave her speech in the morning, and in the afternoon they got married while the family was all together. And by that time I was about 13. First time I met Tony, I figure I must have been about 10 years old. But as a 10-year-old, some adults just kind of ignore you. Not Tony. He was very friendly. Rick and I were, talking about it last night, that we immediately had very good impressions of him as very young men. You go forward a ways, and my wife Ann and I got married in December 1st of 1973. And you may have forgotten, but just at that time, Richard Nixon stopped the sale of gas on Sundays. And we had a trip planned where we were going to drive down to Florida to catch a flight over to the Bahamas on that Sunday. And we thought our honeymoon is ruined. But Tony, being the problem solver that he is, he said, no, we can have people with gas cans all the way down until the gas station is open. And he said, so the first stop was in Cleveland, Shaker Heights, and he brings 3 5-gallon cans of gas out of the garage and pours them into my car. And my father, who worked on the phone with businessmen all over the country, had arranged for gas in Columbus and Cincinnati and Lexington. And then by the time we got down to Knoxville, Tennessee, the gas stations opened up again. We were the only ones on the road that day. Nobody else was driving. But it was Tony's idea, and he came up with it, and we got in an hour before our plane left Miami, and he saved our honeymoon. So Nancy and Rick both love to come back to the old homestead up in Maine, and we had some big family reunions up there. And incidentally, all of the family, the Maine family, send their love and condolences to the whole family, and wish more could be here. But everybody has fond memories of Nancy coming to the family reunions. And we might have 50 to 75 Greenlaws from all over the country. And Nancy got very interested in the genealogy of the family, and Rick has carried on that tradition since then. And but Tony, he fit in immediately. He charmed everybody, just like he always does. And the first time that I had what we call lobster on the ledge and cooked up and served up about 50 lobsters, put a plate in front of Tony, and he was kind of quiet. And then he says, Jeffrey, I can't eat this. It's looking at me. And I said, I can fix that, Tony. And I took it out in the kitchen, and I picked the lobster meat out of the shell and brought it back to him, and he loved it. So for the next 30-some years of reunions, he'd come up to Maine, and the next year he says, it's looking, can you make me a lazy lobster? And all I can say is, I'm going to miss Tony, and I wish I could have made him one more lazy lobster.
So next up, I'd like to invite Art Hucklebridge to come up and speak about some of the time at Case.
Well, I also am honored to have a chance to speak about Tony. He was my very first boss in the world. The first real job I had was teaching here at Case the year that he became chairman. And he was a mentor, a friend, and a colleague, and made our lives much better than they would have otherwise been. I started teaching at Case about 50 years ago, and so Tony's got at least 10 years on me. But life was a lot slower then than it is now. The department functioned very differently. It was a real mom and pop operation at that point. I felt anyway. We had Annette, who's here, as the mother figure. She always had a full candy jar on her desk. We had a lab technician named Steve Marie. He was a father figure.
Yes.
And you walk into the place, kids always got a piece of candy from Annette. Steve always had a dime in his pocket for every kid. And he let him sit on his forklift truck and pretend to drive it. They were just wonderful times. The people that we considered our family in Cleveland was the department because we had no other. And, you know, when you've got little kids at home and your wife goes into labor at 2 in the morning, who do you call? Somebody from the department. And that was there in 10 minutes. So you can't place a value on that kind of atmosphere. And a lot of that atmosphere was due to Tony's leadership in the department. He knew that families were important to all of us. He knew that many of the young faculty members like me didn't have families in the area. And so it was very critical that he made a family for us there. And we all appreciated it. But one of the things I remember about Tony, he put on a pretty gruff exterior sometimes, at least for the kids, for the students. He was, if we had a mom and a pop, he was the godfather. And the kids were, students, I call them kids, students were a little intimidated sometimes. I remember one of his favorite cartoons that he always displayed showed a bridge under construction, and it didn't quite meet in the middle. And the caption underneath was one engineer saying to the other, well, don't we get partial credit? Tony said, no. Said, you either succeed or you fail, and you're here to learn how to succeed. And that was his attitude. He wanted it done right, wanted it done on time, and but the kids always came first. The students came first. Dario and I just had a lunch the other day with some students for their 40th reunion, and they were telling stories, and they said one of them came back, I think it was like maybe 30 years after they graduated, and they stopped by at Tony's office, and Tony pulled out a file. Work they had submitted 30 years ago. And you could still tell them what was wrong with it. That's the kind of teacher he was. The kids knew that he walked a much softer line than he talked in terms of how he treated the students. He would do anything for them, and they knew it. He even got his first speeding ticket, as I recall, driving a bunch of kids to a concrete canoe contest in Princeton. But we had so many social events in the department at that time. We had a clam bake and 2 picnics a year and whatever. Tony was the prime driver behind most of those things. I think Richard and Christiana can verify he wasn't crazy about shellfish. But we had a clam bake nearly every year. Tony sponsored it. And he provided a lot of things for the department that it's certainly not clear the department would have survived without that. Some of the support and the things that he's done for the department over the years. And he wanted the department to be strong, to have a future, and he accomplished that. And it was a pretty big accomplishment. And very much appreciated. Tony was a unique individual. They broke the mold after him, and he's going to be missed by a lot of people.
I did get the notes. Next up, I would like to invite Meg Nystrom to come up, representing Braemar Road.
I was going to put this on my phone, to be more current. I can't see that. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Meg Nystrom. Deeply honored to be here on behalf of Braemar Road neighbors to say goodbye to our dear friend, Tony Saada. When Tony and Nancy moved into the street on 1969, they instantly became part of the fabric that has made Braemar Road such a special place that we call home. Until just a couple of weeks ago, literally, Tony held the distinction of being our eldest statesman on the street, a title befitting the wisdom, warmth, and dignity that he brought to our neighborhood. I've had the privilege of knowing Tony for 40 years-ish, ever since my family moved onto the street. But it was truly in this past 6 months when Richard and Christiana asked me to look in on Tony as a nurse and a neighbor and a friend that he became one of my dear friends. The trust and closeness that grew in this time was a gift, and it deepens my appreciation for the extraordinary man that he was. I always left his house with a grin on my face and a little bit bigger heart after visiting. Our neighborhood actually is united by friendship. I mean, I look out here and I see a lot of neighbors, past, present, that grew up with him or knew him for a very short time. So how do I begin to describe Tony's impact that he held on the neighborhood? Perhaps it's the best way to recall the way he would greet us. One, he offered to every single neighbor when he met them by saying, "Hello, good friend." It's a simple, heartfelt, and deeply genuine greeting. On Braemar Road, many of us have lived here for decades with little intention of ever leaving. That's because thanks to people like Tony, it is the best street in Shaker Heights. We actually joke that we should take invitations before people move in and decide where they're allowed to move into the street. So we haven't done that yet. Soon to come. Tony himself never wished to leave his home because he said his neighbors were beyond marvelous, and he kept repeating that towards the end. We rallied together to ensure that he could remain in the place that he loved, surrounded by those who loved him back. And his home actually brought him comfort and familiarity. He really didn't want to move. He didn't want to move on to Judson. He just wanted to stay in his home. Tony lived a remarkable 91 years. While that number alone speaks to his longevity, it hardly captures the fullness of his character or the warmth that he brought into every encounter. Tony was a fascinating man, a historical storyteller with intelligence beyond measure. He was a repository of memories, always ready to connect present-day happenings to stories from the past, with inside humor and uncanny ability to show how history can repeat itself, sometimes in the most absurd ways. One of my last conversations with him, probably 2 or 3 days before he died, he said to me, "Tell me something that's new happening in the world." And I remarked, "Well, the presidency is still the same, so I really can't think of anything good." And he just got this mischievous grin on his face. The joy that Tony and Nancy brought to Braemar Road was woven into the fabric of our daily lives. We looked forward to Nancy's incredible spring tulip show and the proud display of the French flag every July 14th for Bastille Day. Their presence in the neighborhood block party. They bring a blue tablecloth and a picnic basket every year. Even bringing extended relatives the year that Christiana was engaged. Nancy was a resident master gardener, tooling around the yard in her sun hat and gloves and trowel. We have fond memories of Nancy zipping around the area in her little red Honda Fit and Tony cruising in his beige Camry. In fact, he was cruising around maybe 3-4 weeks ago, and one of our neighbors, Mike, texted me as I was out of town to say, "Yeah, Tony's Tony's behind the wheel. So we are the Rath family lived next door. When they moved in, they lived there for 11 years, and brand new married couple, and they raised their 3 boys there for 11 years before they moved to Columbus. They had a clear view from their kitchen window and dining room into Tony and Nancy's dining room. They finally remember the couple's daily ritual at dinner: candles aglow, glasses of wine ready, and a sense of warmth that radiated outward. In the warm weather, Tony and Nancy would take their breakfast outdoors to the deck, newspaper in hand, always it with a beautifully covered table. One fall evening, the Raths noticed a squirrel climbing around on the living room mantel at the house. With no one home and being new to the neighborhood, they didn't know what to do, so they left a note on the back door, hoping that the visitor was not going to startle Nancy and Tony upon their return. Nancy and Tony also shared many travel photos as we have seen, and stories from their worldly adventures, often sending postcards to the Rath boys. Of course, the neighborhood cannot forget Tony's infamous skiing trip, the one that earned him the private jet ride back to Cleveland after breaking both of his legs on the slope. His sunroom became his haven for rehabilitation, and as time passed, we remember him shuffling around the block in his bright blue jogging suit and his white cap, embodying both resilience and cheer. In recent months, Tony became candid about his decline in mobility and memory. Even as his body and mind changed, his spirit remained steadfast. He continued to greet us as good friends, sharing stories and warmth whenever we visited. His openness in facing the challenges was in itself an inspiration, reminding us to cherish each moment and connection that we made. He left us with a legacy of friendship. And as we gather to remember Tony, we celebrate not only the years that he lived, but the way he lived them, with kindness, with humor, with a deep love for his neighbors. His legacy was not found in grand gestures, but in everyday acts of friendship, storytelling, and community that made our neighborhood, Braemar Road, what it is today. The legacy is one that I hope continues in our neighborhood. Just 2 weeks ago, I came over and I said goodbye to him. I was heading out of town for the weekend, and I wasn't sure if he would still be around when I returned. So he wasn't really responding, but I know in the end, the last thing to go is hearing. And so I talked to him, and I told him what he meant to me, what a privilege it was to be called his friend, and that I hoped our paths would cross again. Using the phrase that he had taught me how to pronounce, I hold dear to my heart, but he taught me how to pronounce it correctly, so I hope I do you well, Tony. That I hoped our paths would cross again in Saada, which in Arabic means if God wills it. To Tony, the best of friends, cornerstone of our street, we say thank you and goodbye. May we continue to honor your memory by greeting you and each other as you did with warmth and friendship. Hello, good friends.
Next up, I'd like to invite Roland to come up and speak a little bit about his time with Dad as he was attending Cape.
Hi, everyone. I'm Roland. I am Toto's brother's grandson, and I call him Toto, so you know who I'm referring to. I didn't have the opportunity to grow up with him. I only knew him rather recently on the scale that we're hearing today. I got to know him once I moved here for college. I stuck around for a while, so over the last 10 years, my wife and I, Lisa, had the great privilege of getting rather close to Toto, which was a great gift. So I'm very thankful for the opportunity to be a part of this and to share a little bit about my experience with Toto. So Toto was a man of intensity. He was an instigator. He was a commander, had the final say. But he used those traits to be a leader, a defender, and a tireless supporter. He was fiercely proud of our family's origins and of our collective refusal to settle for anything less than our dreams. He related tales of threats, angry mobs, and rejection as triumphs, times when he overcame the seemingly insurmountable thanks to perseverance and kindness. I would like to share with you a vignette of my relationship with Toto that played out again and again over the last 10 years. I arrive at Toto's house around midday. Toto lets me in with a huge grin and immediately goes to grab his jacket, wallet, and keys. Suspicious. My friend, he says, do you know about these sweet rolls? You must try them. His daughter Christiane had recently introduced him to Hawaiian rolls. We must go to Heinen's before I run out. I oblige and I drive him. At Heinen's, he is a celebrity. He smiles at the lady behind the deli counter, and immediately she says, Dr. Saada, mortadella, 1 pound, very thinly sliced. When we get back to his house, Toto rewards me with a delicious sandwich made from fresh ingredients. Then we start on the actual plan for the day, rearranging his home office. After an hour or so, we determine the next step will require a drill. So we head to Toto's famous workshop down in the basement. By the time we have resurfaced, I have learned about belt sanders, grinders, every type of drill bit, the inner workings of an industrial dehumidifier, basic plumbing, and just a little metallurgy. Back up in his office, we wrap up the renovations. Toto asks me if his printers still work. I, the mathematician, respond, theoretically. Nothing has changed except the geometry of the situation. Toto, the engineer, says, let's scan and print at least 5 times with each of the 3 printers until we're sure. Afterwards, we share some uzu, his favorite, and he regales me with stories of his childhood in Egypt. Somehow, he always found a story I hadn't heard yet. More than anything, Toto loved to share, whether it was an experience, like the Cleveland Orchestra, a meal, or one of his tales. And actually, this is not written here, but this morning when I was putting on this suit, I discovered that I still have the last ticket to the orchestra that we attended together. That's never left this pocket, apparently. I'll be keeping that. So I have one more example, actually. Toto was a great dinner host. And my wife Lisa and I spent many wonderful evenings with him. One particular evening, we arrived and he had set up the table with candles and drinks and beautiful napkins. Everything was arranged with the plates. And we found this on the table. I've made a few copies here. A menu. And I'd like to read it to you. I think it really captures everything I'd like to say about it. So menu. Number 1, salade royale. Greens, heirloom tomatoes, Brussels endives, feta cheese, various dressings. Number 2, pork mabella, Christiane's cooking. Quote, on the sweet side. Number 3, fettuccine al dente. Number 4, French rolls. This was before the Hawaiian rolls discovery. Desserts, including cookies, ice creams, cognac, Grand Marnier. And finally, hugs, house specialty. Thank you.
So that about wraps it up for the story portion of the afternoon here. We do, however, have food available. We have gone to our father's favorite Middle Eastern restaurant, Nate's Deli, down by the West Side Market, and they're providing shawarma and shishtawuk and hummus and baba ganoush. And my sister and I have made several trays of the family recipe of baklava. So, if you would like to now migrate to the other side of the building, hopefully the food has gotten delivered and we'll all be here. So, thank you very much.
Not a very good design.